And that woman Isabel was referring to joins us now. And we say good morning, hello, to Claire Mercer, whose husband Jason was killed on a smart motorway. First of all, our condolences to you, Claire, because, you know, this is never easy to talk about, and it brings up very, very bad memories for you. But you hope that, I mean, the least you can hope is that Jason's death will not be in vain, that things will change. You've heard the new proposals today from the government. What are you thinking so far?
Not impressed. It doesn't go anywhere near far enough, and a far, far more effective measure would have been much, much easier. They could have easily just flicked a switch and turned the first lane off while they investigate smart motorways for the 25th time in the last 2.5 years. Just pause it. All they've actually promised to do is pause the rollout of new smart motorways, but it's not even all just new smart motorways. It's only ones that aren't substantially completed. So we're still going to have smart motorways opening in the next few years.
Yes.
But they've paused a few.
Claire, they say there will be additional safety measures. There will be more laybys, there'll be more cameras, there'll be more signage to warn about these. But you know, that none of that brings Jason back, and heaven forbid we would lose more lives with this. But I think, Isabel, people are genuinely fearful. They're nervous about, I'm on a bit of smart motorway.
Well, understandably so. And when they hear your story, Claire, about what happened to Jason, that's what plays into everybody's fears, because he was doing what we presumably all would do. He was involved in a minor accident, and tell us, he pulled over into the lay-by. And just take us through that day.
Well, he didn't get to a lay-by. What happened was they had a minor bump near junction 34 of the M1. 2.5 years ago, we all knew far less about smart motorways. I'd never even heard the term. I don't know if my husband even knew what one was. But he had a minor collision with Alexandria Mergignac. It is your legal obligation to stop after an incident. There was a large sign saying no hard shoulder for 4 miles, but there was nothing on it to say, but there's an emergency refuge area a mile out of sight. So they didn't know that, and the crash barrier had them hemmed in. They couldn't get the vehicles out of the live running lanes. They themselves couldn't get over the crash barrier because there was a 30-foot drop onto the slip road below. But they had to stop, so they did, where they thought was safer. I don't know if they knew that they were right by a gantry, and if they actually thought that might help them pick them up easier or whatever, but it certainly didn't. It didn't acknowledge them. It didn't close the lane. They got out their vehicles. They were checking their vehicles, swapping details, and a lorry that should have been in an entirely separate lane on a normal motorway ploughed into them and killed them instantly.
But Claire, what you're describing, I think, is so vivid to people because they could imagine it happening to them. And often when I drive on a piece of smart motorway, I think, if something goes wrong now, what do I do? What do I do? I don't, like Jason, I wouldn't want to stop in that lane. I couldn't stop in that lane. But I spoke to an MP today who's part of the select committee and all of this, and he was wheeled out by the government today, and he's saying, oh, no, but you don't understand. Smart motorways are some of the safest roads in the country. Now, I could choke. We're only talking about 141 miles of smart motorway compared to 1,500 miles of ordinary motorway. But I would prefer to take my chances on the ordinary bit of motorway. How did you feel when you hear government replies like that? Oh, you've got it wrong. These are actually very, very safe.
Well, they just misrepresent the stats. They're going to give the stats that show their argument, and I'm going to give the stats that show my argument, but they misrepresent theirs. It's exactly what you said. There's only 140 miles of ALR smart motorway, but they're comparing the death rate for that with 1,500 miles of conventional motorway. They don't prorata it. So they dress it the way they want it shown, and I'll present the facts that I want it shown. But you can throw stats around forever. Yeah. But if you have to stop on a motorway, would you rather it was in a live running lane with HGVs and other vehicles thundering past you at 70 miles an hour, or would you prefer it was on a hard shoulder?
Yeah, and look, Claire, people don't have to take your word for it or Hugh Merriman's word for it. The coroner who examined your husband's death said that a lack of a hard shoulder contributed to the tragedy.
Yes, yeah. And I mean, they pushed ahead with the prosecution against the lorry driver, But I never felt they should have done that, because they said that he didn't concentrate for 3.5 seconds. But if he'd been in an entirely separate lane, as he should have been on a conventional motorway, he could have not paid attention for 3.5 minutes, and Jason and Alexandra would still be alive.
Well, you know, Claire, Jason becomes a stat. You know, Jason is a stat when the government are wheeling out their answers today, and they say, well, Jason may have died, and which is very unfortunate. But basically, the good news is that the bit of smart motorway he's on is generally very, very safe. Now, there we get some sort of insight into the character that Jason was. Well, I'm glad that's making you laugh and making you smile. But can you tell people, can you let people into the man Jason was and how much you miss him?
I miss him. Sorry. I miss him every day. As you can see, he was quite an unusual looking chap. When the police arrived on my doorstep, they said, there's utter carnage at the scene, and we need you to describe it, Jason, just to make sure we know we've got the right person. And I said to them, if you've got my husband, you know. And they said, we do. It's utter carnage. We don't know who's with what vehicle, but we do need you to describe something. So I read his tattoos to them, and they confirmed it was him. But he was a very noisy, exuberant, outgoing person. He lived for music. I've got so many guitars in the house, and I can't play a note. You know, he lived for his music. Band T-shirts. He had 150 band T-shirts from all the gigs he went to. So instead of a funeral, we had a gig, and I sold all his band T-shirts because I can't store 150 T-shirts. Yeah. And we sold them and gave the money to a local men's charity, men's mental health charity. And you know, it was just it was such. Any loss is a massive loss, obviously, for those that affects them. But such a big, noisy character. It's been over 2.5 years, and he could still walk back through that door now.
And for you, it's a needless loss, a loss that could have been avoided, and you could still be together.
Yeah, and that's when it first happened. I was in absolute shock, and I was shaking and I was numb, and I just thought it was just a tragic accident like they happened. But then slowly I kept hearing this term, smart motorway. And I slowly learned over the coming days, not only was he not in his car, he wasn't even protected by his car. The truck hit his body. The truck hit his and Alexandra's body. Because this is what happens on these roads. You have a problem and you get out of your car. Almost every fatality is out of their car on these roads.
But Claire, he's still with you. He's in your mind. He's in your thoughts. He's with you every single day. And he, I suppose, still is what keeps you going in your grief. How are you going to channel all that love, all that, you know, the fact that you're missing him so much? How are you going to channel that now?
Well, we do a lot of things to represent him personally, because obviously we don't want him to us. He's not just a stat. You know, we do things like have the gigs, and he's not buried. He's cremated, and I'm saving his ashes for when we win the campaign, and I'm firing him into orbit because he was into astronomy as well. But in terms of the campaign, I'm not stopping. I mean, look at that man. It's a lot quieter in this house now. And, you know, how do you replace that? So we're not stopping. And the announcements this week actually bolster our legal campaign, because the Highways England, National Highways, have been refusing to even acknowledge our legal challenge. They've just been refusing to engage. So, but now that the government has had to respond to the Select Committee, Erwin Mitchell can use that response, and this just springboards our legal challenge into court now. And these announcements this week will marginally reduce the casualties while I continue to fight this in High Court. But the government are obviously going to go all the way and make me fight this in court while more people die. But I'm not going to give up.
Claire, keep on fighting the fight.
I wish you the best.
In Jason's memory, and really appreciate your time and explaining so eloquently and passionately what you're trying to do. Thank you very much indeed.
Jason, we're so proud of you. Thanks for coming on.
Yeah. So Claire Mercer there, I mean, she's the human face of a news story that you're getting today, and that is the Transport Select Committee have reported to the government, and the government basically has broadly accepted the recommendations from the Transport Select Committee. So basically, in short, what this means and what we're hearing today is that no planned smart motorways will be built, but those under construction, as Claire pointed out, will be finished, and existing ones will have more lay-bys added to them, or refuges that they're calling. And the big exercise now is to accumulate more data on this whole
presumably
subject.
to educate drivers as much as possible, because it sounds like the jury's out on whether or not they are safe.